The popularity and influence of avant-garde cinema has fluctuated between the 19th century to the present day. Avant-garde cinema, defined by its experimental and alternative approach to filmmaking, has experienced a fluctuating influence and demand since its inception in the early 20th century. It has fluctuated throughout history as a collective reaction to socio-political events, such as the rise of the surrealist art movement, vertical disintegration of Hollywood's film industry, French New Wave and Italian neorealist influence, coinciding effects of the World Wars, and the failure to pass on avant-garde practices and culture. Although its experimental roots began in 1902 with George Méliès' La Voyage dans la Lune, it was not until the 1920s and 1930s that avant-garde cinema fully emerged, with some iconic films like Dudley Murphy's Ballet Mécanique and Un Chien Andalou, co-directed by Louis Brunel and Salvador Dali. They were highly acclaimed and unlike anything that contemporary audience had seen before. With the world shifting between wars, an anti-culture was created. Dadaism emerged in 1916 and left the heirs to surrealism in 1924. These international art movements were symbiotic with the rise of avant-garde cinema. In a society where billions of cinema tickets were sold, and cinema ever growing, avant-garde was a satirical resistance against entertainment, calling for an audience shift in perception and condemning materialism. This forefront cinema was heavily popularized after World War II and had a good run in the 1940s with films such as Meshes of the Afternoon, Maya Deren, along with an influx of European filmmakers immigrating to the US. The international art capital was moved from Paris to New York City. Although there was a surge in avant-garde filmmaking as filmmakers objected to the commercial monopoly over Hollywood, the 1950s was met with a dull and uninspired avant-garde film scene. After the 1948 United States versus Paramount Pictures case, theater-going was no longer as profitable under the studio system. Hollywood was like waking up with a bad hangover in the 1950s after having an impressive decade of film during the 1940s. The film industry's vertical disintegration combined with a changing social demographic structure that shifted entertainment within the home, which coincided with the rise of television broadcasting, resulted in a commercialized and uninspired wave of cinema, where even revolutionary French cinema was bogged down by generic historical reconstructions and uninspired literary adaptations. With theater attendance in decline, and being that avant-garde films rarely break even, let alone make a profit through the markets of the mass commodity, they did not have much influence until the French New Wave and Italian neorealism revival of cinema during the mid to late 1960s. Avant-garde film as a nonconformist protest had its greatest social impact between then, with major avant-garde films released including Marco Polo's Twice a Man, Anger's Scorpio Rising, Antonio's Blow Up, Lynch's Eraserhead, inventing a new wave of cinema where the avant-garde cemented its place. Compared to the individual period of avant-garde filmmaking between the 40s and mid-60s, the establishments of centers such as Millennium Film Workshop in 1966 alongside the resurgence of experimental works, the 1960s saw the establishment of the new American cinema movement. Following the surge seen in the mid-60s and its oscillation into the 1970s, avant-garde cinema eventually reached another stagnation of influence and cultural relevance. Camper describes the movement for the first time since its emergence as having no impact on the culture as a whole, and that the collective audience has decreased dramatically. As a result of institutionalized avant-garde filmmaking, the movement failed to pass on what was learned to a new generation of artists. The teaching of avant-garde practices, signified by Marco Polo's employment at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, although unsuccessful, led to a movement of avant-garde filmmakers and institutions. Teaching avant-garde and experimental filmmaking in itself is paradoxical, and creating cinematic guidelines had a reversed effect. The core of avant-garde filmmaking seeks to reform perspectives and challenge the society as a whole. Establishing it as a practice meant that avant-garde films were now structured and oversaturated, resulting in a semantic satiation of meaning and ideas. Instead of focusing on what is actually depicted, there's a larger focus on irony through imaging, rather than inner complexity. Thus, the art failed to inspire a new generation of filmmakers who strive to create a forefront in cinema, completely oblivious to the fact that something new will soon go old if it fails to be revolutionized. Emerging to the 21st century, avant-garde cinema began to evolve as a result of changes in technology, culture, and audience engagement, also allowing a broader range of voices to contribute to the avant-garde tradition. Coupled with existential terror and cyber-globalization, the push for neo-avant-garde in the early 21st century resulted in merging experimental techniques with a mainstream allure. Names like Lynch and von Trier showcase this coexistence in films such as Mulholland Drive and Melancholia. This is also apparent currently with the film Everything Everywhere All at Once, using advanced editing methods, extensive CGI, as well as an avant-garde scene consisting of 2 rocks, detailing how hybrid methods paved the way for both commercial success and thought-provoking complexity in contemporary films. To summarize all the key points, avant-garde cinema has indeed fluctuated throughout the 20th to the 21st centuries. Beginning in the 1920s and 30s, resurging in the mid-1960s, and emerging as a revolutionized neo-avant-garde due to technological film, streaming, and distribution advancements in the 21st century. As a movement deeply rooted in reformative social, political, and ethical commentary and criticism, avant-garde cinema will continue to rise and fall, depending on circumstances and influences, much like the ebbing flow of the universe that avant-garde cinema attempts to portray.